Okay, everyone, so welcome along to the RTLB Aotearoa Te Whare Whakaruruhau webinar. It is Friday, the 2nd of May. I've been overseas, so I'm kind of like getting used to being back in the New Zealand time zone. If everyone has already popped their name and cluster into the chat, that would be awesome. And I think we can pop on to the next slide, please. Okay, you're all welcome to say this with me. It doesn't have to be a one-person thing. Let's say our karakia. Ngā mihi o te rā, ki te whānau e hui hui nei, ke tau te rangamārie, kia whakatapua tātou me ngā mea. E whakapono ana tātou haumi e hui e tai ki e. All right, and we have our whakatauki, which I think is a really good one for this morning. It is about filling our basket of knowledge, and that's why you're all here. As you know, this is the third webinar in our series that we've been doing, and some of you, I can see from the names, have been at all three of them, so thank you. If you have missed the first one or the second one, don't worry, because they really are standalone webinars anyway. So if we could go on to the next slide, please, Fiona. Just some housekeeping that we need to do. If everyone, I can see everyone's already doing this, if everyone could please mute unless sharing. We are recording the session and it will be shared with you. So in line with our kind of like motto of what we're doing, we're connecting, we're inspiring, and we're uplifting each other by being here this morning. If you could add any little questions or gems or links to the chat throughout the session, we will also keep a record of these, so that will be impacting on what we do for our next webinar. And I do want to say one thing. I know that during COVID, a lot of us had some interesting experiences when we went into breakout rooms. And what we've noticed is with our webinars, whenever we say we're going into a breakout room, we have people that are out of there so quickly. So I'm asking if it would be possible, when we are only going to have one breakout session, if you could stay, because what happens is we've got group numbers all worked out, and when we have people that exit really quickly, sometimes people end up in these tiny little breakout rooms and we have to do some kind of configuring. So please, if possible, you will hopefully get a lot out of those breakout rooms. All right. So on to the next slide. It is my pleasure to introduce Michelle Wishart. Michelle has been the lead facilitator for this series, and she is an RTLB from Cluster 5 in lovely, wet, cold Auckland. She has a wealth of knowledge to do with a lot of things, but particularly in the area of trauma-informed practice. And I am really proud to be a member of this team, and also very proud to be a Westie like Michelle and to be her friend. So Michelle, I am going to hand over to you.
Right, just bear with. Right, hello everybody, nice to see you. I can't see any faces. Slightly disconcerting, but I know that you're all here. Yes. So yes, welcome, and thanks for choosing to spend your Friday morning with us this morning. So we'll crack on and get going. So once again, I invite you to be curious, because it is in the curiosity that we're able to learn, and it's through uncertainty. And it's interesting, I just had a conversation with a colleague yesterday, and many of you will probably relate to this, right? New LSC, and she said, it's really difficult. And I said, why is that? And she said, because she knows everything. And it's very difficult, as we all know, to work with people that know everything. And that importance of being curious is just crucial to our work when we're working with our rangatahi. So thank you for your curiosity this morning. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat, And if it's just like too much, I've just got to ask this question now, if you could just use raising the hand icon, and maybe we could, my colleagues can keep an eye on that. So thank you. And also, I know there is amazing mahi going on all around the motu, and it would be brilliant to share some of that, as part of our community of practice. It's great to hear what others are doing, or as we know, sometimes people aren't so great at putting themselves forward. So maybe you could suggest some people too, because as we move on, it would be good to hear from some voices of experience and what's working, so we can really build a community that's really supporting each other. So, well, let's recap. I know that, as Tracy said, some of you have been to the ones before, but it's always good to recap where we've been from. And actually, I think this is the fourth one, Tracy. So, because we did this neuroscience, regulate, relate, and now this is the reason one. So let's get cracking. So we looked at what is trauma, and it's the result of a single event or the result of adverse experiences, and it can be intergenerational. But the key thing is, how does the person process what's happened to them? And it impacts, as we know, on how their brain works. And that's why we can have two people that have the same experiences and not be affected in the same way. And I had an experience earlier this week where I heard this. I was just saying to my colleagues earlier, if you have had the opportunity, we had the most amazing PD with the Polynesian Panthers, who were part of the way back during the Dawn raids that started as a result of that. And it was 3 of the original Panthers, and they were absolutely stunning. But one of them, Tingilau Ness, he's Niuean, and he spoke about when Captain Cook entered Niue, and the thing he recorded on his piece of paper about it was that they were savages, and he put savage islands. And Tingy was saying that he grew up believing, and this is back in 1794, so this whole intergenerational thing is very powerful. He grew up believing, we are savages, I am a savage, and that's what I'm going to be. So he said in his early years he was quite reactionary. So something that happens a long time ago can have a profound effect on people generations later, and it's really important to understand that. We know about brain states. This is probably the crux of our work, is understanding the brain, understanding survival brain, need for safety. Safety is first. Then the need for connection and emotional, being able to feel loved and connected. And then we can access our executive state or our thinking brain, and then we can do things like problem solving, we can gain wisdom, and we can learn. And is using the wonderful Dr. Bruce Perry's model, neurosequential model, regulate, relate, and reason. And we all know this now, we cannot go straight to the thinking brain, and we have to help our mokopuna to regulate. We looked at what dysregulation can look like, because sometimes dysregulation is just viewed as the angry or the frightened, or it's sort of emotional, can be more emotional, but other things can look like dysregulation too. So all of those things, I'm not going to sort of labour this, but it's important to know that there is a range of ways that dysregulation can be presented. And then Ginger Healy, children cannot do more than their brains are ready to do. So choosing to choose better behaviour when they don't have a properly developing prefrontal cortex is like asking a child to fly, and so often, right, we get presented with IEPs or something, and some of them are like, they will make better choices, the student will choose, and it's like, well, hang on, are they able to choose? That's higher order thinking right there. And then we have to co-regulate. Because many kids, especially those who've experienced trauma, have not had that experience of co-regulation, that serve and return, and sort of that, constant modelling. They cry, they're comforted, and people responding to their needs. So many times they need co-regulation first. And I love this, be a thermostat, not a thermometer. right? Thermometer reacts to the temperature of the room. A thermostat sets the temperature of the room. And I think as adults, I think that's a message we really want to get across to all of our schools, I think. And we also need to make sure we're holistic. We take a holistic view, because it's not just about behaviour in a single narrow focus. It's about our whole being, our hauora, and each of those areas needs to be adhered to. And then teachers need to create, it's about whakawhanaungatanga, creating an extended family classroom where student voice is attended to. And this is going to be quite a big focus of this session, this concept of student voice, because once they're actually able to access their thinking brain, what is it that they want to say and need to say, and what is it we need to understand? And this is important. No matter how good our intentions may be, if they sense we think they're deficient, they can respond negatively. Developing attuned relationships, and that means noticing and responding. You know, I see you, I hear you, I've got your back. That was something Matt Brown, the writer of She Is Not Your Rehab and a popular presenter, I think many of you might have seen him or heard him or read his book, but he was asked at a session once, you know, what would 5-year-old Matt like to know? And he said that was his thing. He wanted his teachers to see him and to know and to hear him. And it's really powerful. And even our own new New Zealand curriculum states, we learn best when we experience a sense of belonging in the learning environment and feel valued and supportive. Our social and emotional well-being directly impacts on our ability to learn new knowledge. Now, this is in the beginning of the new literacy and numeracy curriculum. And I find it interesting that the focus at the moment, there's a frenzy of structured literacy and maths and everything. And yet this is the stuff that needs to be the foundation before that stuff can really take off. And it's a really hard message to get across, but it is absolutely crucial. So we just have to keep persevering and keep on keeping on. We learned about some statistics about the number of kids that feel unsafe at school or felt like they did not belong. That's a third then, feeling like they did not belong at school. And when that takes up a big portion of their day, that's a horrible feeling. And unfortunately, those stats are worse for our disabled, LGBTQ plus and our Māori kids. And we looked at relational neuroscience, and that is the foundation of healthy brain development, that positive relationships actually strengthen neural pathways. That is what it is. It's relationship. The issue is with a lot of our kids that we work with, I should say, is that sometimes they don't always present, they don't have the types of behaviours or personalities that endears them sometimes to the adults. And teachers naturally connect more with those students who are more engaged, and they have a harder time connecting. I've worked with kids who, I remember one boy, and his whole, all day, every day, because of his extreme behaviour, he was tall, he was a teenager, the teachers didn't talk to him because they were scared of him. So all day, every day, he'd go into a class and he would not be spoken to by anybody. And the impact of that is unpowerful. And I don't believe for a second that the teachers were intentional. It was just a sense of they didn't know what to say. They'd got rebuffed before, and they just said, well, we're not going to. But it's a terrible thing for this was a young man, to spend his days in an environment where he was not acknowledged, and then wondering why he would react. Okay. And also, sometimes kids, they hide their needs. They're staunch, man. They've got it. They don't need anybody. I don't need you. And in actual fact, they really do. And they, as it says, traumatized students' presented needs are so often very different to their hidden emotional needs. And once again, Bruce Perry, the powerful reparative functions that in connection and relationship, once again, building and repairing new pathways. It's like just the more they have, the more that turns into, you know, from the dirt track to a path to eventually, you know, you would like it to be a whole 8-line highway in there, that everything is just going great. And that's only through repeated exposure and through repeated positive experiences that that can happen. I say that this is very hard, this constantly reviewing them with unconditional positive regard, that every day is a new day. No matter what happened yesterday or this morning, I still care for you, I still think you're great, and we move on. Holding grudges or throwing stuff back in their faces is not helpful. And I'm sure we've had experiences where you've seen that, and it can be quite upsetting actually. And once again, microdosing, this is my big thing, microdosing of positive interactions on a regular basis can make a huge difference. We talked about a framework for relationship, which we call PACE, and I also shared a PACE project that my friend and colleague Terry, who I know is in this webinar right now, with one of our schools, and what a great success it was. And we are actually doing PACE as a full focus for our next webinar in relation to a school that's implemented it school-wide. But PACE is a lovely model for relationship, because what I've learned is we talk about it's all about relationship, but what does that look like? What does that actually mean? And so PACE is quite a good framework from Dan Siegel to help adults and teachers understand the ways of relating, playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. Now up to reason. I love this quote. Reason is the gift of safety and connection. Isn't that such a nice quote? Unfortunately, I can't remember who said it, so I can't attribute it to the person, but I just read it recently and I just thought, man, I love that. Reason is the gift of safety and connection. And I thought, yes, that is exactly that. And being reminded by Vessel van der Kolk, though, that the whole concept of, say, children who defy rules or who are unlikely to be brought to reason by verbal reprimands or even suspensions, teachers' perspectives begin to change when they realise that these kids' disturbing behaviours started out as frustrated attempts to communicate distress and as misguided attempts to survive. So that reason, once again, reinstating that I've lost my train of thought. That reason can happen when kids are feeling stressed or they're in distress. And actually the importance of understanding that. I'm actually really feeling it. So many people nod, and I've presented a lot of times now, and so many people will say, yes, that's right. Oh, I get that, I understand it. But then back in the classroom, when the stress is on you as a teacher, it's very hard to remember that. So it's like, that neural pathway in adults' brains about understanding that needs to be heard repeatedly over and over and over again before that becomes your default thinking, I think. And I thought, as I was thinking about the whole concept of reason, I think student voice is really crucial, is the crux of it. And you know, Article 12, every child and young person has the right to express their views, feelings, and wishes in all matters affecting them, and to have their views considered and taken seriously. And I did when I was doing my study, one of my assignments, I did it on student voice. And one of the things I discovered was that a lot of schools support student voice, the concept of hearing the voices of, you know, the students and getting student input. But often what happens is that the voices that are heard are the voices of those students that comply, or that are doing the right thing, or they're given the leadership, or it's the school student counsellors, and in actual fact, often the kids that are sort of viewed as their behaviour issues, their voices are very rarely heard. And they are, because voice becomes, well, you have to earn the right to share your voice. You don't deserve, with that behaviour, you don't deserve to have your voice heard. And the cycle continues, right? The feeling of not being listened to, why should I try? And so the cycle continues. And I'm currently working with this amazing young woman. I shall call her Sapphire. It's not her real name. And I just had a meeting with her and a big meeting with including her. And I was commending her for her ability to be in the meeting. There were 8 other adults. There were 8 adults in the room with her about this meeting. And I said, I said to her, look, I really am impressed how you are speaking. And there's a lot of adults in this room. And this was what she said. If you were going to have a meeting about me, then I better be there. And she was pretty staunch. And I thought that was brilliant. And the fact is that she was prepped and she was in a space, she was calm, and she was in her thinking brain. She was able to share at that meeting because she felt safe and she felt connected because the people around her were the people that she'd selected. And I'm going to be talking more about that a bit later. And then this quote is really important that we get across to the adults that we work with. Young people and adults need equitable relationships. They do not need equal ones. So this is quite a thing out in the world right now, is it? Equality, it's all about equality. And then we go, but what about equity? And we know it's not about equality, we know it's about equity. And as that says, equal relationships, it's a sameness, treat everybody the same, everyone has the same rights. And that sounds fair, but doesn't account for age difference, experience, development, vulnerability. Equitable relationships recognise these differences and aim to create fairness by providing what each person needs to thrive. That might mean adults take on more responsibility, offer more support, or make space for young people's voices in ways that match their developmental stage and life context. And I think as adults, we are the ones to ensure equity with students and getting this across to our teachers, that they are in positions of power and how are they going to moderate that to ensure equity for those students who feel very disempowered. It's very easy to use your power to get compliance, but that does not work with a lot of kids that have experienced a lot of abuse. In fact, I just had another meeting yesterday with one of my students, and there was no way. She was struggling in a particular class because the teacher, you've forgotten your book. Where's your book? Why haven't you started? That's not okay. And her whole reaction was F off, actually, and just walking out of the classroom. Some of the other kids responded to that. Oh, no, I'm sorry, miss. But it's really important that adults recognise the power that they have. And I know, especially because I work mainly in high schools, that a lot of teachers feel like they're very disempowered. But they need to recognise that with those kids, they have a lot of power, and how that's used is really important. And so some key understandings about reasoning. So one of the key things is that our cognitive functions, like our language and our reflection, our executive functions, are in that thinking part of the brain. So that's why we need to get there, because that's where that wisdom happens. We also want coherence, that helping students make sense of the world when they are ready is really important. And still recognising that when the stress increases, then can be a downshift, going down back into the emotional brain, down into the survival brain if it gets pretty bad. And also, this is crucial, reasoning must be matched to the developmental, relational and regulatory state of the student, not just their chronological age. Just because someone is 14 doesn't mean that they have got the skills, interpersonal skills or social emotional skills of a 14-year-old. Sometimes I worked with kids who were that age, and honestly, their EQ, I guess, their emotional intelligence was probably like that of a 4-year-old. And so that is where we had to support them. And it can be clouded by, sometimes these kids are incredibly streetwise. And so they actually even seem older. So it's hard to believe, it's hard to reconcile the streetwise, verbal, sassy kid, and then think, actually, in this setting, they're sort of probably like a 3 or 4-year-old. But that is exactly where they need to be met in that area, like co-regulation, support, and really understanding that. So, I've got something on my screen here. So when students are feeling regulated and connected, they can access their thinking brain, and we need to listen to them with curiosity, without assumption and judgment, and with empathy. We need to acknowledge their strengths and challenges. We need to find out their triggers and glimmers, and then teach them and their peers. I think this is crucial. So often we teach, we're going to teach this student how their brain works. We're going to teach this student about zones of regulation. It's much more effective if it becomes the language of the whole class. The language of emotional regulation, the language of relational connection needs to be something that's taught to the whole class. That whole adage, what's essential for some is good for all, fits this. I view this as tier 1. If we're looking at that pyramid, all of these things to me are tier 1 strategies, systemic strategies, classroom strategies that should be used with all kids. And I know there can be resistance to that, because as soon as you must make it about one kid, it becomes work. It becomes extra work for that kid. But actually, if it becomes part of your classroom, it's much easier. And there's greater benefit. Okay, moving on. Cool. Executive functioning. So we all know what that is, but according to McCrory, children who experience childhood maltreatment demonstrate poorer performance on tasks of executive control, together with reduced neural efficiency and more effortful processing relative to non-maltreated children. And what's interesting is that, having read a little bit about this, that there actually hasn't been any research to establish, they're not sure yet, whether poor executive functioning is a causation or a correlation. And be that as it may, it's still there. When kids have experienced a lot of adverse experiences, their executive functioning seems to be impaired. And also those kids with conditions like ADHD or autism, their executive functioning can also be impaired. And it's the executive functioning that actually can cause a lot of the hassles. So it's really important that we help teachers to understand how you can support executive functioning. And these are the 3 that are particularly relevant. Making sure that, Bruce Perry talks about things being predictable. So providing a structured and predictable environment. They thrive at a structured, predictable, and low in distractions. Clear routines, consistent expectations help feed calm and security. Social rules and expectations sometimes need to be explicitly explained. We can't assume that kids understand everything that we say, especially kids that are very, very literal. I've got a boy that I'm going to talk about soon that he needs things very specifically explained. Nothing can be ambiguous. We need to support planning, initiating activities and staying on track, breaking things down, using simplified, structured and predictable environments. We all know this, visual routines for transitions, visual supports, being able to come back and have something to look at, and also modelling, doing self-talking. I wonder what I do next. It was in a action plan meeting with was at a school with Mum, and we were looking at her daughter, and she was feeling a bit guilty about the support that she was providing for her daughter, who was 11. And she said, I think she needs to be more independent. And this wee girl has diagnosed with ADHD. They haven't decided to medicate her yet. And I just had to make the point to her that supporting her it was like she thought it was a bad thing, that she felt like, oh, I should be making her more independent. And I said, your daughter needs the support that she needs, and you provide that support. Don't feel like, oh, I'm doing something wrong. And I think that's really important. Myself, I have a daughter who's 27. She has ADHD. She has an executive function disorder. And at the age of 27, I still have to help her with breaking things down or reminding her about, remember when that happened, this happened, that cause and effect. It's a really hard thing to learn, and kids need the support they need. And sometimes as a parent, and it's really useful for educators to understand that, because sometimes there can be that view, oh, the parents did too much, or the parents are doing that. Sometimes parents provide that support because they see that's what their child needs. And that, breaking things down and doing a bit at a time is essential. I remember Ella getting these big assignments at high school, and she would just look at it and go, and it was all laid out clearly, but it was so much. And it's like, how do you break it down? And it's really important. And for those kids that have that find that really difficult, it's essential. But actually, there's going to be lots of kids like that. It's a thing. This should be general classroom practice, in my view. Supporting working memory. Simple short sentences. Repeat instructions. I think working memory is a big one. Having a daughter with a working memory disorder, she's in the first percentile, so she could never remember anything. And so she constantly got told, oh, you obviously haven't listened. I've told you 3 times already. But there was nowhere for her to go and look, to check. She got embarrassed to ask her friends. So she would just sit there and just not do anything. And then, of course, she disengaged, and so the cycle continued. And so kids that have poor working memory and they can't remember, they need to have things that they can refer back to. They need to know that they can ask and they're not going to get an eye roll, or because it can be really, really damaging. And then teaching memory strategies and memory games and all of that sort of stuff. And this other one is a big one, cognitive flexibility. That's all about your transitions, being able to, cognitive flexibility, being able to sort of change from one thing to the other. And often our kids like this with trauma or neurodivergence, these are some of the biggest issues for them. And often it's at these transition times that we see the big behaviours. And so there are ways of managing that, giving them advance warning, having symbols, timers, helping them see new situations and finding the similarities from another situation, modelling self-talk, and also setting them up. When I was working at Westbridge, where the kids were needed those very clear boundaries, every time we did somewhere new, we were going somewhere new, we would meet and we would go through set them up. This is what's going to happen. Your safe space will be there. This is where you're going to sit, right down to the last detail. So they had in their mind, they knew exactly what was going to happen. We used to call them setting them up for success. And often these kids need that. Even, okay, we're going to assembly. Okay, so when we go to assembly, this is what we do. We make sure, and making it very, very clear and very explicit. So, and this is, as I said before, gaining authentic student voice. So I'm moving in now into a sort of some work that I have been doing, an example of some work I've been doing with a couple of students. So gaining authentic student voice. So I worked with this boy, Micah, not his real name, and there's a bit of a little profile about him. 14, or DHD, is autistic with ADHD. We suspect possible PDA, which is pathological demand avoidance, and significant trauma. Can have very explosive behaviour issues, significant sensory issues, particularly with noise. He's very lonely and aware of that. Has a special interest in horror, which he shares with his mum. Movie making, assessments are extremely triggering. And he's articulate, very creative, outstanding drawing skills, and encyclopedic knowledge of astronomy as well. He does have an ACC-funded teacher aide. The school has been great, though he's allowed to leave class when overwhelmed. And his preferred ways of regulating are respected, and this is huge. So when he is completely overwhelmed and it is just too much, what he does is he goes, there's a space, it's like the ante-room. So there's this room that you go through, and there's a staff bathroom and one door, entry to the resource room and another door, and then the learning support department through the other door. And it's perfectly pitch black because there's no windows in it. When he is completely overwhelmed, he will go in there and he will just lie down on the floor, and that's just what he needs to do. And they accommodate that because there's no other kids going in and out that area, and that's what he does. And I remember walking through, and the Senko said, "Oh, just mind Micah, he's just taking some time." And we walked past and he was fine, and then after a while he came right. But I thought that was an amazing example of really respecting a student's preferred ways of regulating. It was no big deal. There wasn't a big deal made out of it. He does have excellent relationships with a Senko and a particular TA. However, his classroom teachers struggle to know how to relate to him because he's quite a big boy. They tend to ignore him, and I wonder if they're a bit scared. And so when I worked with Micah, in order to get access to his reason, his thinking brain, and to ensure he was well regulated, I had to I thought he needs to be with the people that he trusts. So his TA came with him and worked with him on this work. And so she has a really good understanding, and he's very trusting of her. If it was just him and I, he wouldn't have engaged. It took me a long time to get him to even acknowledge my existence, to be honest. So what I did was, one of the things that I find with students is that when you're trying to get their voices and you try and have a conversation about, well, what do you need? What are your triggers? What's important? They don't actually know, and there's a lot of labour involved in trying to work it out. So myself and my wonderful colleague Terry, who was on this, came up with these statements, a whole different range of statements. I laminated them, and then when I said to Micah, look, yay or nay, I said, do you want to read them or do you want me to read them? You can put them in a pile, do whatever you like. And he said, oh, can you read them? So I read them, and with his TA, it was amazing how he responded. I find it hard to talk to people I don't know. Oh, definitely over there, yes. I feel worried about making friends all the time. And so he was able to respond, and then we sort of also learnt a bit more information. So these were the ones that we ended up with. And, you know, I don't know if you were looking at those. There was a very clear theme that came out as and his TA and I looked at it. There was a lot around, I feel upset when I lose track, too many new things to learn, people talk too fast, don't know what to do, don't know where things are, get lost when there are too many instructions, doing assessments is stressful, having a visual schedule, confused, I get angry, I feel better if someone explains the rules, get stressed if I don't have enough time, I get frustrated if the instructions are not clear. Basically, we decided that clarity was a huge issue for Micah in the classroom. He needed things to be extremely clear. So that became quite obvious. And also that a lot of that is executive functioning, right? So then with that information, I just put it into a document for all of his teachers. And as you can see, I mean, this was just something that I did. I'm sure there are a million other ways to do it. But as you say, the key strategy was microdosing of positive interactions with Micah, greeting him, checking in quietly, low key, and avoiding the use of too many questions. He didn't respond well to questions. And I put that in because, as I said earlier, microdosing is really important. And because he is a boy that is often ignored. And so actually being specific about making the intention to do that. And then I put clarity is extremely important. And then there is these and how explaining why that is and what needs to be done and explaining to teachers about what can happen. And just so they understand, so knowing how long an activity will take is helpful. If he is confused, he will often stay quiet and not ask for help, especially from teachers he does not know. So it's important for people to know, for a teacher to know that. He can get upset when he doesn't know what to do. It's really important that people know, that teachers know these things. And also the signs that he's becoming dysregulated. So that's what he does. So between him, and it was his TA often, that was the main source of information, is that he'll begin grunting, his face becomes fixed and angry looking, he'll verbally snap, and he will actually start thumping the desk. And because it can be quite threatening, the teachers can sort of sometimes come in and try and sort of stop it, when in actual fact, it's like just pull back, stop asking questions, give him space. That was a huge thing for a lot of kids. Give me space and give me time. And then things that help. So what to do when he is becoming dysregulated. Maintaining calm. And this was the crucial, give him time, leave him for a few minutes and come back, because he can actually de-escalate very quickly. But teachers sometimes with the best of intentions will sometimes want to keep going and check. Are you all right? Are you all right? He hates that. So it's very clear that people know these things. Don't take it personally. That's key. And then there were some worries. He worries about making friends. This was a huge thing for him, and it was a huge thing for his whānau. And he finds it hard to talk to people he doesn't know. He worries about what to do in break times, and he can feel unsure about how things work and obviously changes of routines. And so, mitigating those, maybe getting the teacher to think, oh, maybe Micah could sit with these people, it might help him develop some connections, and finding those opportunities to work with others and preparing him in advance for changes in routines. So that was just like a brief, like a one-page thing that his teachers can see. This is understanding Micah. And this came from Micah being in a good space and being able to express that. But he didn't have to use words, because sometimes there are kids that can easily, but for many kids, they go, oh, I don't know, yeah. And I just found that having things for him to choose from was really useful. Now, moving on, and then that's not all though. So in terms of dealing with the friendship thing, we decided on and because he was into horror, using special interests, we organised a Weta workshop tour with two other students that we thought he could make good connections with. And so we went off there, we went off to Weta workshop and did an amazing tour, and it was fantastic to see a group of kids who are in their special interest and really seeing what kids in the thinking brain looks like. It is amazing. Suddenly these are kids that were virtually, some of them virtually non-verbal at school, chatting, talking what they can do, sharing, because there's lots of stuff that you can do there. And the teacher aide that I went with was just like, wow, it's amazing. And just seeing the animation, thinking that these kids never smiled and were never excited. It was powerful. And we just thought at the very least, that experience in of itself was a worthwhile one, because they had a day where they just felt completely motivated and inspired. It was just brilliant. And then as a result of that, we're creating a special effects makeup group with those boys. And so we're going to take them to the special effects store where they can choose their special effects makeup kits and stuff that they would like to do. And all of that stuff is authentic ways of using their thinking brain. And it's authentic. And that's authenticity is key if we really want to make change, I think. Sometimes we construct these sort of groups and we try and specifically teach social skills or whatever. They don't work. But if we create authentic experiences, it's much more successful. Annie is another wee girl. There's her sort of brief profile. She was a little pocket rocket, is what she was. Tiny little thing. But man, she could create mayhem. But I loved her sassiness and brilliant sense of humour, incredibly streetwise. She had a sort of safe place in class. School, she liked to visit the office because she got on really well with the office lady. She was dysregulated, pretty good relationship with the teacher, but there was a tendency to try and get compliance, to get her to comply, and it just did not work. And so one of the things that she did, I said swearing to teacher. The reason I'm not swearing at the teacher is she wasn't insulting the teacher. What she would do is she would just say, this is effing ridiculous. In fact, one of the things she did was that they were doing some work and she obviously didn't want to do it. So she emailed her teacher and just said, this is effing boring. Can I do something else? And so that's the kind of student that she was. And yeah, she was pretty hilarious, actually. Anyway, I went through the same thing with her. You'll find that hard if I enlarge those. So these are her things. So she had a lot more. What was interesting with her is that when I started doing it, and I put one of the first one was, there was something that I like having, that's right. I think the first one I put out was I like having a visual schedule to follow. And I put that out there and she went, nah. I said, oh, you don't like a visual schedule to follow? And she said, oh, I do, but I don't have one. And I said, oh, no, this is not what happens. This is what you would like. This is what you think that you might need. And she went, oh. And so she was very clear. She was very clear about what she needed and what things she found difficult. Yeah, it was very, very clear. And the ones, because there's lots of them, and there was ones that she said, no, I don't care about that. It doesn't worry me. So it was quite good at taking away the guessing, I suppose. And she was able to very calmly show all of the things that were important to her or that affected her, things she needed teachers to know. And then we could make a plan, I suppose, make a profile. And so I did a profile with her, slightly different, but that we did about challenges and what is helpful, what signs of becoming dysregulated, things that help. And these were things that I talked with her about, her worries and uncertainties, and how we might mitigate those worries. But once again, you can see the key strategy was microdosing. greeting her, checking in, finding frequent opportunities for feedback. And I had to actually specifically say this, at least 5 positive interactions before 1 negative as a general rule of thumb. Because when I observed in the class, there were very few positive comments made. And I don't think it was intentional, but sometimes I don't remember it as a teacher, you can get into a pattern of negativity. And so we had to be really intentional about finding 5 positive things before, or having 5 positive interactions before 1 negative, because she didn't hear many positive things. She's now since left the school, so I no longer am working with her, so that sort of stopped at that. Now, Sapphire, coming back to Sapphire, this is another really important thing. You know, when Sapphire was last term, she had a 5-day stand down due to physical assault of another student. Now, the normal process at the school is you meet in the stand down room. The student is advised by the DP of expectations and consequences. Oh, look at my spelling area there, sorry. If they do not meet these, they check in at every class and are graded on a 1 to 3, and they have to get at least a 2. Very firm communication, and a restorative conversation with the other party is mandatory. Now, the thing about that is that's not going to provide good access to her thinking brain. And it was very serendipitous that I was in a meeting with the SENCO and her ACC psychologist. And the SENCO very cleverly went and got the DP and introduced, and we talked about Sapphire's reintegration because it was happening the following week. And we emphasised what was important, because we were saying it's important that she comes back and she's to be calm and relaxed as possible so that we can have good kōrero. And so we talked about needs to be a warm welcome back. We need to be pleased to see her. It needs to be an informal meeting with Kai in a welcoming space. Not insisting on a restorative conversation because there is no way that was going to happen. That the check-ins could happen with her TAs, not with a deputy principal or someone she doesn't know. That we listen to her what she needs, because she's very articulate about what she needs. That in the meeting we ensure her key adults are present, because normally at these reintegration meetings, SENCO's not present, her teacher aides aren't present, and yet they are the ones that have the most to do with her. And that Mum and Sapphire are asked who they would like at the meeting. And the DP, he was great actually. It was a new thing. And I think that's part of, I'm just going to take a step back. None of the schools I work in are trauma informed. And I think that can be a challenge. So in our work, what can we do to be true to what we believe? And I guess this is what I end up doing, is I just sort of end up sort of explaining things, and just this one reintegration meeting has had a powerful impact on the staff around. And so I would hope that maybe they'll think, well, that's worked well, let's do it with other kids. So sometimes in our work we can sometimes feel a bit, but it's not, they don't get it and they're really behaviourist. But we can work within our sphere of influence, and we can make a difference for one family at the very least. And I think that's sometimes how I look at it. I've got another colleague it's just sometimes you just have to think, right, I can make a difference for this family. And so the DP was very open to this. So we had that reintegration meeting. It actually ended up being 2. There was the back at school, and then on Wednesday we had the one with all of her key people. And it was incredibly successful, incredibly powerful, and a lot of healing was done. And Sapphire was able to really express openly what she needed, and she could see that people received it. The dean listened to her and said, I understand that. And she was ready to go back to class and just carry on, and there were accommodations made, and she was a happy girl, basically. I saw her yesterday and she was smiling and she was happy. And this was a wee girl, according to her ACC psychologist, that when she started working with her in primary school, she was feral. She growled, she spat, she didn't talk, she was nonverbal. And now we have this 14-year-old young woman who's incredibly articulate, beautiful nature, but still with lots of work to do. And it's understanding that sometimes the beautiful nature can hide the needs that are underneath. And she actually says that. She said, I try so hard to keep it together. I try so hard to be calm. And I said to her, so when you say you try so hard to be calm, are you actually calm? And she said, no. And I said, well, that's good for us to know, because that takes a lot of labour, keeping calm. And I thought that was powerful. And I think that's something it made me realise in our work, that kids appear calm, but sometimes they're trying to do that with their whole being until eventually they can't. So it's a really important thing for us to be aware of and get our teachers to be aware of. And then amongst all of that, I also did a presentation of understanding trauma to the teachers of my cases, including Micah and Sapphire and some others, which has led to me now presenting to the whole staff. So hopefully now that more and more people are getting the messages. So it's sort of just starting with one sort of case, and then it's just sort of expanded out. So that is sort of a way of sort of increasing your sphere of influence, I guess. Now, I'm going to go on now to some just things that you'll be familiar with. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them because they of themselves are a big thing. So restorative practice is another obviously thing about how we repair and make things right. I really like Mark Thorsborn's and Joe Brummer's approach to restorative practice. But what I want to make very clear is that restorative conversations need to be voluntary. They can't be insisted upon, because otherwise it will not work. Often they're used as restorative consequences or a way of, you will say sorry, you will do this. That's not what they're about. And I like this. Mark says restorative is less about what to do and more about who to be. And it's not about punitive consequences, but repairing harm. And that I like these, the skills, 5 skills: asking questions, honest expression, empathy, art of request, mindfulness. So these skills, their book, Becoming a Trauma-Informed Restorative School, they talk about this. I highly recommend that book if that's something you're interested in, because this here is a whole nother webinar, right? So I'm not going to go into huge detail, but this is restorative practice is one approach, I guess. The other one is obviously CPS with Ross Green. Many of you are probably doing the CPS communities of practice, so I'm not going to go into it, but I would say the empathy step is a fantastic another way of getting student voice. And I've just included the drilling sheet. You're not going to be able to read it, but you can find it on the page. But just that, how to drill down and get their voices, get the student's voice, is really skilled. But yeah, CPS. In terms of CPS, I see CPS as like a tier. We have tier 1, and I think that's all of our, emotional regulation, trauma-informed practices, coping strategies, breaks, the neuroscience, importance of relationship, and all of those things. To me, CPS is like tier 3. you do all the base things. And then for those kids that need more support, CPS is a brilliant approach. And also teaching the kids, as I said, teaching the kids flipping your lid is a brilliant one way of getting kids to understand. And these here are links to a resource about teaching kids to flip their lid. And this is a video. I'm not going to click on it, but when you get shared this, you'll be able to explore that. Teach the language of regulation. There are many different types of regulation. Zones, sometimes it's like, oh, zones has its place. If it's done well, it can be really effective. The problem with zones sometimes is that green is seen as a target, and that's something to get around. The green zone is not the good zone, and sometimes that can be a bit of a misunderstanding, but if it's done with fidelity, it can be really effective. This here is about energy meters from Level Up Autism, and they have this thing about energy because sometimes some autistic kids don't understand emotions very well, but they understand energy. So it's about energy levels. What are the energy needs that I need for this? What energy needs do I need for this? And that can be really a different way. And then things like mana potential are other ways of regulation, learning a language of regulation. There are more, I know. Oh, and coping strategies. I had a nice picture there, but I don't know where it's gone. So, however, that link, there is a coping strategies resource, which is quite significant. It's got a huge range. So if you're wanting access to that, you are more than welcome to use those. And I think we are headed to breakout rooms. There's been a lot. I just feel like I've burbled on and on and on. And I hope you've managed to gain something from my burble. But I will pass over to my colleague now who will give you further instructions. And yes, thank you. I look forward to hearing your kōrero.
Oh, kia ora. Thank you, Michelle. That was fantastic. I've just had to do a wee recreate. But before we go into breakouts, there are a couple of great questions, and I just wondered if you might be able to quickly speak to those.
Sure.
So Adrian had asked, what are the best visuals and auditory accommodations for teachers who become easily frustrated when having to repeat instructions multiple times?
The easiest visuals and having to, I guess, well, visuals, it depends on the age of the students, because visuals can include just writing. Like having taught older kids, my kids used to like me just to write the timetable. It wasn't pictures. So sometimes just writing it can be okay. But if they're younger, there's lots of different visuals. I can attach some different examples if that would be helpful.
Awesome. Thank you. That's great. And we had a question. Marie Lundeen was just asking if we could have a copy of the regulation student voice statements resource.
Yes, I'm happy to share that. I'm sure Terry and I don't mind that. Yeah.
Yeah. And Lavinia was just wondering, was the learner profile your action plan, or did you have that as well as the action plan?
Okay, so this comes into how RTLBs work, right? So the way I work is I tend to do what needs to be done when I come across it. And because I work in high schools are quite a different animal. I do work in a primary school as well, but I found that with the schools that I work in, they're not happy to have too many meetings or too many things. So it's my way of working around just responding to what's needed in front, and that's what I do. In terms of Max, I guess it is his action plan, but it hasn't been a formal process. It's sort of been responding, because he's been quite a unique case. The normal sequence of events has not been applicable to him, and I think that's something else. And I'm lucky I work in a cluster where that is, what's the word? That is respected. And so, yeah, I don't think I've been very clear, but it's just what was needed, and so I did it.
Thanks.
Yeah.
No, thank you. It's awesome. Okay, so we've got about 12 minutes in your rooms, and I should be able, oh, you'll be sharing this into the breakouts. Oh, okay, I'm just going to do a recreate just to make sure we get our numbers right. 2 seconds, bear with. Yep, that should work. And we'll do our best to get this slide shared into the room for you. All right, have fun. Everyone should be in their room.
Change the view to be able to change your view so that we can see everybody. You're on mute.
If you pop up to view at the top, just look at what that's. Oh, does that do it?
I'm on multi-speaker, but I think it's your view. So it's focus mode is ending, yeah.
Yep. Sorted.
Okay.
All righty.
So I hope you had some good kōrero there in your groups. It would be good to hear back from some things that were talked about. Who would like to go first? Just put your hand up and use the hand icon. Okay, bye, Kath. Anybody? I can't. Or maybe are we not? We're all not. We find that we're all good.
Sorry. No, kia ora. We thought you're only going to see a yellow screen because we can't get our video to work, sorry. But there's 3 of us here from Cluster 21, Vicky, Tracy and Edna.
Hey. Nice, can't see you, but nice.
Hi, thank you. We were just having a kōrero around a bit more focusing on student voice, hearing the voice, but actually responding to it.
Right. Yeah. Great.
Which was one thing. And then using visuals for the juniors in terms of what they like and don't like. Because we were referring to I don't know if you know the Journey to Rangatiratanga cards.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Those came up. What else?
Okay. Yeah, that's another really good resource, actually. Great. Thank you. Does anybody else have anything that they would like to make comment on, or fine if you don't?
We've got Susie Q over there.
Yeah,
sorry.
and just apologising to Adrian and Nadine because Abby and I probably took up a lot of the time. Just talking about so often our kāko want to jump straight to reason, but actually just circling back and instead of talking about how regulated akonga are, it's just that it starts with us. What can we do to actually become regulated ourselves? And so we're talking about the importance of some of the strategies you were talking about how the brain works and executive functioning, but for the adults to understand what they are themselves, rather than just expecting the kids to be able to do those things. So
absolutely, and I think that also behoves us as RTLB that really we need to know our stuff too. Like we really have got to be on a journey of upskilling and learning about stuff, because there's so much research coming at us all the time, and I think sort of you can't know everything, but just being open to new learning, I think, is crucial in our role. Yeah. Thanks, Sue.
Yeah, cool.
Adrian.
Yeah, I just
Hi.
wanted to say no need to apologise at all. So because what our group, that's what was on top for me, definitely, and it's probably for a lot of people, is that the teachers I'm dealing with are themselves in a trauma space, and it gets a bit it's like a spiral, it's like or a circle. So yeah, I was quite happy to listen to what everyone was saying, because there was some great ideas coming through. Thank you.
Great, thank you. All righty. Okay, thanks, Kathy. Right, I will pass over to my colleague Anthony now, who will finish off the session for us. And so thanks very much for your time.
Here, Michelle, I'd just like to say what an awesome presentation. In fact, a couple of people in the chat just said how awesome your presentation is, and I know a lot of participants will go back on your presentation. I think what makes your presentation stand out, Michelle, is your attention to detail, but really drilling down with your case studies of students.
Thank you.
So really awesome. All right, so in terms of what's next, we want, we've actually had a name change. So we're RTLB Aotearoa now, Professional Learning Network. So when you get a chance, tell someone who doesn't know about our network and bring them along to our workshop. Great way to connect. I'm sure you'll all be able to do this at multiple levels, inspiring in terms of learning about something that you've learnt today. I've certainly learnt many things as well, and I've been in this game for some time. Uplift, look to reframe a student's behaviour using a trauma-aware relational neuroscience lens, and encouraging others to be curious. All right, as Michelle has alluded to, our next session is around PACE. PACE was developed by Dan Hughes. He's an American psychologist. Stands for Playfulness, Acceptance, Curiosity, and Empathy. On Wednesday, 4th of June, we'll be looking at PACE, and we'll have a school that will share what they've done around the PACE project. Michelle will be leading that, so looking forward to that. All right, next slide. Thanks, Fee. All right, as said, please have a chance to look at our awesome website, RTLB Aotearoa. There's so many different aspects to the website. We've got groups there. You can join our Te Whare Whakaruruhau group. We've got podcasts. We've got blogs. We've got all sorts of different information around trauma-informed practice as an example, but also leadership. And yeah, just delve in and get lost on the website. That would be really awesome. So I'm just going to invite Tracy to come in now for closing karakia.
All right, thanks everyone. And just before we do the closing karakia, I just want to just say all the best to any of you who've been impacted by the weather events that have been happening around the country. It's just crazy times. So I know when I woke up this morning and I looked, I know Canterbury and other parts of New Zealand have been really impacted. So I hope you're all okay, and that all your loved ones are okay. So please join in with me. Kia tau te manaakitanga, ki runga, ki tēnā o tātou. Kia piki te ora, kia piki te maramatanga, kia hoki pai atu, kia hoki pai mai, tūturu, whakamaua, kia tina, haumea huie, taiki. Go well, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks.